All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're gonna give everyone a few minutes to come in and get settled before we actually jump into the content here. This is a really interesting one because today obviously with my Yankee paraphernalia here is opening day for baseball, and then so in the lead up we were talking a little bit opening day, and then a little bit of also continuing to go skiing on our team here. So we're right at that shoulder season where there's still lots to do. Before we dive into the content today, did want to let everyone know, as you can see on the screen, that we do have a number of events coming up. We have a Freshpaint Live Roadshow that is coming to a city near you. And in particular, for those of you attending the HMPS conference, we will be in Las Vegas with an event at the Vegas Golden Knights game. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat to learn a little bit more about that Freshpaint Live event series and how you can potentially request an invite to that. So we're super excited to welcome everyone in for that event. I think we can probably dive in to today's content. Let everyone catch up as they're coming in and getting settled. So welcome to episode 2 of the 5-part series on healthcare marketing privacy. Today's topic is going to focus on a safe by default marketing stack for healthcare. Before we jump in, did want to mention the webinar today is being recorded, so we'll share that out with everyone that registered. And feel free to forward that on to any colleagues inside or outside your organization that might be interested in seeing the recording. Also, if you have any questions as we go through today, the Zoom has a Q&A feature, so you can go ahead and put your question there. We'll have some dedicated time for Q&A towards the end of our webinar today. So before we go any further, we'd love to introduce our speakers. Once again, same as our speakers from the last webinar, myself, Dave Twitchell. I'm our Director of Demand Gen here at Freshpaint, and I'm joined by James Sylvester, our Head of Sales Engineering, and Zach Hauer, our Senior Sales Engineer. You may have noticed that nowhere in our titles did it say anything about being an attorney or lawyer. So this is the disclaimer before I turn it over to James and Zach, that we have a lot of experience working with healthcare organizations and in particular marketers within healthcare. But none of us on this call are lawyers from the Freshpaint side. And so we encourage you to make sure that you are involving your own legal counsel in any of the decisions that you're making. So with that said, I'll turn it over to James and Zach.
Thanks, Dave. Hey, everyone. Super excited to be with you all today. I'm going to be covering a bit of an overview and driving the slides before passing things over to James. So in today's episode, we'll be digging into how to build a safe by default marketing stack for healthcare. We'll start by reviewing everyone's favorite subject, the HHS OCR guidance and recent updates on that front. Then we'll cover how this has thrown a wrench in traditional digital practices for healthcare, but we'll end on a positive note showcasing how our unique approach at Freshpaint makes it very easy for you to turn tracking back on for these mission critical tools, doing so in a HIPAA compliant manner. So before we dive into the specifics on this, wouldn't be a Freshpaint presentation without first aligning on what we mean by HIPAA compliance and what a HIPAA violation is. So per the guidance, a HIPAA violation is when you share an identifier from the list of 18 personal identifiers that have been shared with health information to a non-HIPAA compliant destination. There are some obvious identifiers like name and email, but properties like IP address are also considered identifiers under HIPAA. And on part 2 of the equation, something as general as a page view on a condition-specific page could be included in the health information bucket. So a real-world example of this might be a potential or existing customer searching cardiologist, clicking on a paid search result on Google, taking them to the cardiology section of their regional hospital site. So any third-party tracker, likely Google in this scenario, running on that page will be able to capture their IP address, plus the fact that they are seeking cardiologist services, and that is where the HIPAA violation comes into play. So the question is now, how can we continue to create positive digital experiences with the help of analytics, optimize our ad spend, and conduct other mission-critical digital projects while remaining HIPAA compliant? So the way forward requires a privacy-first approach. We have created a framework for this. In episode 1, for those who attended, we covered step 1, auditing, and started to touch on step 2. And today we'll expand on step 2, analyzing, while also showcasing some tools for verifying the PHI or potential data that we're sharing with these third parties. For those who missed last week, we are offering any attendees of these webinars the opportunity to run, for us to run an audit of your website and generate what we refer to as a web tracker monitoring report. This will give you insight into any trackers that are currently installed and running across your consumer-facing or marketing sites, potentially opening you up for litigation or regulatory risk. So if you're interested in this, please respond to the poll that just launched, or if you're watching the recording of this webinar on demand, feel free to just pause this and scan the QR code, and that will allow you to submit a request for a web tracker report. All right, so it won't come as a surprise to anyone to hear this, but our healthcare customers have a lot of tools that they rely on. Historically, it was very easy to add something like a Google or Meta pixel directly to your site and get all the insights and performance data you needed without having to worry about non-compliance. In retrospect, this gave these third parties the ability to collect a lot more data about your customers and prospective customers than was required for them to provide the services that you were leveraging them for. An example of this, it's why after visiting the orthopedic section of my local hospital's website, I open up my Instagram account and immediately see an ad for a completely unrelated orthotic product. Google, Facebook, all these other third parties collect this data for their own business use. And that is why, enter the HHS guidance on non-compliant trackers, they wanted to stop this unfettered collection of data. Good news, though, as of last week, on March 18th, HHS released updated guidance and clarified that when a healthcare organization leverages a tool such as Freshpaint, also known as a customer data platform, to share data with a non-BAA covered destination, that is in line with the original guidance that they released and allows you to share data in a compliant manner. Go next slide, James. Great. So now that we know the old method of having third-party pixels or trackers directly installed on our marketing or consumer-facing sites is not copacetic with HIPAA compliance, but have hope that with a platform such as Freshpaint, it allows us to pass data to these tools in a compliant way. The first step is to determine which destinations or tools need to and can receive PHI and which do not. So on the left-hand side here, you can see tools like CRMs, session replay, or heat mapping tools, data warehouses. Those are all tools that rely on PHI to accomplish what you're leveraging them for. So those are all tools that if you see them come up on a web tracker report, that you need to confirm that you have BAAs in place with. On the right-hand side, platforms such as analytics, ad tools, other tools that have been coming up more and more in conversation, like embedded video and maps. Inherently, these platforms do not need to collect PHI or HIPAA data in order to accomplish what you are leveraging them for. So that's the first step there, is bucketing the tools that you're using into BAA covered destinations where you will be sharing PHI, and non-BAA covered destinations where you will not be sharing PHI. Once you have categorized your tool stack, the next step is to implement a PHI governance or filtering layer in order to continue to use these non-BAA covered destinations in a HIPAA compliant manner. This is where Freshpaint enters the picture. So instead of having those third-party trackers or pixels directly installed on your site and vacuuming up all the data that they can get their hands on, you will remove those from running and you will add the Freshpaint pixel. At this stage, Freshpaint, we are an auto track solution, so we'll be collecting all event-based, browser-based data client side. We have a BAA in place with our customers. Then we will filter out or give you the ability to filter out any PHI before sharing critical event and property data with your analytics and ad platforms using a secure server-side connection there. This approach allows you to safely continue to use these existing tools instead of going through the time-consuming and expensive process of switching to a completely different tech stack where you might have BAs in place with everything, or might have some drop in performance or ability using non-covered destinations there. All right, so now that we've established how a tool like Freshpaint can help solve what was previously a pretty daunting challenge, I want to circle back to this concept of being safe by default and focus on a few unique differentiators of our approach. Unlike other tools such as generic CDPs, we are what we refer to as safe by default. And this is because any data that we collect on your behalf via our pixel, we assume that all of this data is PHI. So before sharing it with any destination, we are basically starting from zero and allow you to build your own custom compliance allow list policy that will reflect your internal legal and compliance team's guidance and view of what they deem to be PHI and appropriate to share these destinations or not. And as I mentioned, all of this data that is allowed is shared via a server-side connection, which is more secure than having any pixels installed client-side. James will go into this in a bit more detail in the UI once we get to the demo, but the way that we accomplish this is through our allow list. So as you can see on the left-hand side here, these are some example events or properties. And on the right-hand side, we have our HIPAA compliant or BAA covered destinations, such as our CRM tool or data warehouse tool, where we might allow certain events that include PHI to be shared with those destinations. But in the bottom right here, we have our non-HIPAA compliant or non-BAA covered destinations, where we might block via our allow list certain events and properties from being shared with those platforms that do not need to be shared in order for us to run our user experience analytics reports or pass through conversion data to our ad platforms in order to measure how our ads are performing and optimize for future performance. So it's one thing to show a slide of this, but next I'm going to pass it over to James to pull up the product itself and walk you through a bit of a demo of how we accomplish this.
All right, so let's get right into it. So what we'll do is we'll look at all the different ways that Freshpaint will work with you to configure your allow list. As Zach mentioned earlier, we work directly with your legal counsel and your compliance team to build out the allow list so that as a marketer, you can do the things that you're best at. You can build new campaigns, create new tags and conversion actions for those campaigns without having to worry that you're introducing any net new HIPAA risk or violation. And that is, again, because we have solved for that on day one by working out the details with your compliance team so that it is no longer sitting on your shoulders as a responsibility. So let's look at how that actually works. As Zach mentioned earlier, the starting point with Freshpaint is that we assume everything that we're collecting from your site is PHI. We then build out this allow list. There's two ways to build out an allow list. One is to first allow properties such as site visit count that are universally valuable to be sent to all your downstream destinations. Site visit count is a good example because it's helpful for understanding the difference between first-time visitors and return visitors in terms of engagement with your campaigns, or maybe even just differences in viewing behavior on your site. But the key thing here as it relates to the allow list is that site visit count is just a number, so it is neither an identifier or health information. For that reason, we universally allow list it so that it is passed along to all of our downstream destinations, regardless of what type of tool that is. So that would be one example of a universal definition on the allow list. But now let's actually jump into a more specific example. We'll go over to Google Analytics here. As a starting point with setting up Google Analytics through Freshpaint, we will sit down with your compliance team to essentially build out a list of exactly what you want to send to Google Analytics with respect to what you want to achieve in the tool, but also balancing that with how your website is set up and where PHI may be contained within it. With a tool like Google Analytics, where you will not have a BAA, Freshpaint will be anonymizing user identities as a starting point. And by doing so, you can then pass in health-related information because it's attached to an anonymous ID. When it comes to building out that process, we will go through all possible data points with you. And again, start with essentially a blank checklist like this. And then we'll walk through and say, okay, based on your site and the way that data is being collected and the position of your compliance team, are you comfortable sending user agent? Most of our customers are in the case of user agent, because this data point is really just helping you understand the difference in type of device that your visitor is accessing your site from, whether that would be, a mobile device, cell phone, or compare that to a laptop or a desktop experience. So we continue to walk through this, turning this allow list into a conversation with you, where you can rely on Freshpaint to scaffold out the conversation, but then we ultimately look to you to provide guidance on how your site is set up and what your compliance team is comfortable building out. So we go through this and we build out this allow list with respect to your team's legal interpretation. Once it's built out, it acts as a set it and forget it thing, because now as a marketer on a day-to-day basis, you can safely send new events to Google Analytics without having to worry that you're introducing any new HIPAA risk or violation. Because when you send an event to Google Analytics, we will only send a version of that event that has been sterilized with respect to that allow list that we built out on day one. So that's how you can use Freshpaint to send new events to a tool like Google Analytics safely. Finally, once all this is said and done, we give you the ability to essentially validate and verify the before and after of what Freshpaint initially collected from your site, which you'll see on the left here. And then you can compare that to the resulting basically data object that is the output once the event has passed through the allow list rules. And this is, again, just another layer to give you perfect visibility into what's happening when you're using Freshpaint. This is especially helpful for compliance teams and also for preparing for any potential auditing that you may be working through. So that's just the high level of how the allow list process works with Freshpaint. Again, the point here, the takeaway here, is that we assume that all information is PHI as a starting point, and then we build out the allow list with you so that once it's set, you as a marketer no longer have to worry that you are creating any risk of HIPAA violation, because that has been taken care of before you're doing day-to-day work in the platform.
James, real quick before you wrap up the demo, not to put you on the spot, but would you mind going back to our destinations and just showing an example, since we have some time, of Google ads or Facebook ads?
Sure. Yeah, so for each tool that we're working with, we will break out different properties that we would recommend you pass through. So We talked about Google Analytics before, with the different properties being things like user agent or URL. But when it comes to integrating with a tool like Facebook, there's actually required properties. So in this case, user agent is a required property just to even get Facebook ads off the ground. So again, we'll tee up this conversation with you to walk through those different data points, scaffolding out what is absolutely necessary to pass through from what might be a recommendation, where you can then compare what you want to send to what your desired outcomes are in the Facebook tool itself. All right. So we'll jump back over to the slides now.
Yeah, thanks, James and Zach. That was a great presentation and demo. We're gonna open it up here in a minute for questions. But while you're all thinking of what you would want to ask our presenters, I did want to give a quick plug for our next upcoming event for those of you that are going to be at HMPS in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks. The Freshpaint team is working with our partners at Invoca to host a suite at the game, the Vegas Golden Knights game against the Anaheim Ducks on April 18th. You can hit the link there, or I just also put it in the chat if you would like more info and to request a spot to join us. We'll have about 70 healthcare marketers that are there enjoying some food and drink and awesome hockey. And then also wanted to remind everyone that this is episode 2 in a 5-part episode. So hope you can all join us for next week, which I think is probably the episode that is the most highly anticipated one of the series, which is going to focus on making ads and analytics compliant. I'm dropping the link to register for that one. If you're registered for this event, you're already on the registration list for next week. But if you have colleagues that would like to join, you can forward them that link as well. So again, thank you everyone for your time. We do have a few questions that have come in, so I'll call them out here. Starting out, the HHS, Zach, you talked about the guidance. The HHS has now called out that CDPs are an approved way to remove PHI from the data that's being sent to online tools. How does Freshpaint's approach compare to other legacy CDPs?
Great question, and glad this was asked just to reemphasize our main differentiator here. So with a standard CDP, their main intention or use case is to collect a bunch of data and then act as middleware to distribute that data as is to a bunch of different destinations. This inherently doesn't have a privacy first or very healthcare focused spin to it. With Freshpaint, we still have that CDP functionality of collecting all of this critical business data from your marketing site, consumer sites, applications, whatever that might be. But before sharing with any destinations, we have that HIPAA allow list filtering that is flexible for you to set up to reflect, as James mentioned, your own internal policy before sharing with any of these destinations. So that's our core functionality there. And then in addition to that, for folks who have joined other episodes and will join future ones, we have a lot of other features that complement that core use case that are purpose-built for healthcare marketing teams. So just to summarize that, CDPs collect everything and share everything as is. Freshpaint, we collect everything, but share nothing until you explicitly say, yes, we are okay with sharing this with this type of destination.
Awesome. Appreciate you spelling that out for everyone. I do know that, when you talk about a marketing tech stack, different organizations are going to have, there's no two that are exactly the same. So I'm going to launch a final poll here as we go through the last several questions, that if you would like to connect with the Freshpaint team to continue the discussion about your specific tech stack and how we can help, you can respond to that poll and we'll reach out to set a time. We did have a question come in that for healthcare marketers that are working with their reps from Google and Meta and other providers that are saying things like, oh, we hash the data, so PHI isn't a concern. Or we see this with Google with GA4 saying that they promise that they don't store or log IP address. How would you respond to that claim?
Yeah, I can jump in here. Yeah, this does come up often. So there are options provided in tools like Google Analytics to essentially obscure IP address. The problem with this approach relative to the HHS guidance is that those platforms are still collecting IP. They're just obscuring it from the end user of those products. The HHS guidance says that they cannot collect it to begin with. So in order to actually use tools like Google Analytics or any other IP collecting tool in a HIPAA compliant way, you do need to have Freshpaint in front of it. Specifically what we'll do for Google Analytics, because we know that Google Analytics relies on IP address to generate geolocation data, is we'll actually change the IP before sending it along to Google Analytics so that you can still get state level geolocation information in Google Analytics. And the reason that we provide state level information is because under the HHS guidance, anything more specific, anything more granular from a location perspective than the state level is considered a personal identifier. And so we will not send personal identifiers to Google Analytics and therefore meet in the middle by providing a state level IP address instead.
Awesome.
To expand on that too, on the ad side, because I feel like with specifically mentioning Google and Meta, this is probably some ad reps letting you know that it's still okay for their pixels to be installed because they're hashing data. 2 comments on that. HHS and OCR were very, very intentional about laying out guidelines on what level of hashing or encryption is okay, and simple hashing is not compliant. There's a certain encryption threshold that needs to be met that these providers are not when they collect data client side. And the second part of that, when we think about ads, and back to my example of visiting a condition specific site and then opening up Facebook or Instagram and seeing a ad for a unrelated but semi-related product, even if they are hashing, they're still collecting as much data as they can to power their ads engines. And so it's a bit of a non-starter there when we're thinking about advertising to share anything beyond a ad click ID and a conversion event.
Perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. So next question was around tools like, and in particular CRMs. So can Freshpaint make CRMs that won't sign a BAA HIPAA safe?
I can touch on that. And I know there's a handful of CRMs that do not sign BAAs for whatever reason. Technically, we can make them HIPAA compliant. That really diminishes the value of a CRM, though, because CRMs inherently should be storing PHI to get the full value from them. So our recommendation would be, if you're using a CRM that does not sign a BAA in place today, we can help bridge the gap and share some information in a HIPAA compliant way, but the best long-term solution is to find a CRM that does sign a BAA.
Yeah, I know that that's been an issue, particularly with a tool like HubSpot that will not sign a BAA, where the reason that you want to have HubSpot is so that you can send people more customized, personalized marketing. So you need their contact info and some level of info about what have they been visiting, what have they been doing on the site. Also wanted to ask, you looked at earlier that sort of 2 different classes of tools that some will sign a BAA and okay to use on your site, some will not, and that's where the governance piece comes in. But is there value in using Freshpaint to replace the trackers even for those tools that will sign a BAA?
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think there is, because you're just expanding the available data that can then be sent to those tools. So if we were to take, for example, an email marketing tool, they often have pixels running on your site so that you can associate a conversion action on your site to a email that you sent out, right? those tools provide limited options when it comes to actually tracking the full scope of behaviors happening on your site. And that's actually really where Freshpaint specializes. We'll get into this in a later episode here, but what we provide you with is a codeless point and click way to set up new conversion actions on your site. And the goal there is really so that as a marketer, you can be completely self-sufficient from engineering resources when it comes to tracking new actions on your site and then using those as conversion events for any of your of the other tools in your stack. So looking forward to sharing that functionality with everyone here, but that will be something that I think we hit on in the fourth episode.
Awesome. This one may also be something that we're going to hit on in a future episode, but the question did come in around, in a HIPAA compliant world, is retargeting just not an option anymore? Or are you more just creating general personas, or anything to share there?
Yeah, $1 million question there. Retargeting is possible with certain platforms. With Freshpaint in particular, we can support retargeting with Facebook, for example. But the contingency there is that you are okay with sharing IP address to Facebook. A lot of our customers are okay with that because with ad platforms, we are already sharing an identifier through the ad click ID. So adding IP address is okay as long as we are not also sharing health information. That could be health information like the name of a page or clicking on a certain button that contained a condition. Could also include how you are naming your campaigns in these ad platforms. So if you are planning to do retargeting and are okay with sharing IP address, that's totally okay and doable, but you also need to make sure that you are aligning with best practices around not naming your campaigns in Facebook with any health specific data. Like this is a campaign for spinal surgery, for example, like use a code word instead.
Yeah, no, that's good. So it's retargeting is possible, but maybe not condition-based retargeting. So you can't build an audience that's everyone that visited the diabetes page. Okay, now we're going to retarget them, but you can do retargeting at a higher level. Looking forward to hearing more about that in next week's episode on ads and analytics. And then I think our last question to close out for today is, what's the most important place to start when you're evaluating your tech stack?
Yeah, we can, I mean, we touch on this all the time, but this does come back to our privacy framework. And I'll jump back to that real quick while we're here. The goal is really just to create a common ground on what we're solving for first and what our priorities are. So the audit stage is going to say, it's going to tell you all the different trackers running on your site today. And then we'll also be able to stack rank those for you when we run this audit with respect to how these things are putting you at risk of a HIPAA violation based on what they're tracking, where they're sending that data to, so on and so forth. So once we identify the culprits here, we work with you to build a plan to basically solve for those. And that could mean verifying when a BAA is in place. It could mean replacing those tools with Freshpaint, or it could mean that maybe they're not actually used and you simply just want to remove them and consider alternatives. That's a conversation that happens perpetually with us through your account management team and through your implementation specialists that you'd be working with here at Freshpaint. At the end of the day, we are a managed service. This is not the type of thing where we give you the keys and walk away. When you sign a contract, we will be responsible for your success and we will continue to support you as legislation changes and make sure that you are a step ahead of responding to that and to things like auditing as well, should that be a factor.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I think the tools that most people are most concerned with are those mission critical things around specifically ads and analytics. And so that's a good note to close us out on, that we hope you can join us next week. So it'll be next Thursday, April 4th for episode 3, which will focus on making ads and analytics HIPAA compliant. Until then, hope everyone has a great opening day for baseball fans and a great rest of your week. And we'll see you next time for the next episode in the Healthcare Marketing Privacy webinar series.
Thanks for
Thanks,
joining.